going live.
We actually just hit live.
Live now.
Welcome back to Walking and Talking. This is Josh, live with Luke Gorsett, Ron Martina, and Zach Hall. And on this part, we just finished up 10 books, or 10-ish, 10 or so books. So hopefully we'll have 10 or so events or moments in our lives now that we found profound and influential that we wanted to kind of document and share. So, Pastor Ron, you want to lead us off? What are some moments or events in your life that have been profound?
Well, I did that lengthy series of interviews, and I hit a lot of high spots, some low spots in my life. But I would have to think, and they're probably very common to all of us, is marriage. I was single till I was almost 40. I pastored for 7 years as a single person, and I shared this in the prior podcast when I was interviewed, but just having a pastor friend and his wife match made Diana and I, and kind of an interesting process and how that all went. Other people had tried to match make us. They'd have dinners after I might have preached at a church, and they invite me over for dinner, and there's Diana sitting. They always had strategic places where they sat us, and there was this constant attempt to put us together. But I had gone to a Sovereign Grace conference, and that's where I'd met her for the first time and was dialoguing with her. And a beautiful young Reformed Baptist, loved books, loved good hymns. She had memorized so many hymns from the Trinity hymnal. She had a Volkswagen, and she worked at Children's Hospital, and she would put the Trinity hymnal on the steering wheel and memorize hymns while she was driving to work. I'm sure that's equivalent to texting these days. It's illegal, but in any case, so there were just so many things about her, and then all these matchmaking attempts, and it took a while before it all clicked. But I'd have to say that was a monumental, especially that late in my life. I thought God, I believe God was sovereign, and somehow He was going to just sort of drop somebody into my church and, just work it all out without having to go outside of those boundaries. I didn't think dating was a thing that I should be doing as a pastor. It just didn't feel right. So it was a matter of waiting for God to deliver someone at my doorstep, and it just didn't work that way. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, we had good friends that... and we've taken up a matchmaking ministry since then. I've had some great stories of putting people together. We just went to a wedding a few weeks ago of one of the children of a couple that we match-made the parents. We match-made the parents years and years ago. But so, yeah, I would have to say meeting my wife, marriage, and we just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary.
Hey.
Yeah, so
is that an advertisement for singles to seek you out for your services in matchmaking?
Yes, matchmaking is a great art. It's a wonderful thing to do. You have to be very cautious. Not everybody appreciates it, but I would say that I'm not really the candidate for preaching singles conferences. Nobody wants to hear that I didn't get married till I was almost 40. That's sort of a discouragement if they're wanting to get married and they're younger, but in any case, I would say that was... So are we giving two? Because are we going around and giving the second one? Because my second one would be my children.
Yeah.
And then grandchildren.
Yeah, you're in the zone. Go ahead.
Yeah. Having a first child, when we found out Diana was pregnant, just the excitement of that. Now, interesting thing about preaching when you're single is you get to those passages in Ephesians and child rearing, and, my people were very gracious, and they would kind of cock their head and look at me, and they had that, you just wait and see. Yeah, you'll find out. Yeah. And I don't believe you have to experience everything that we preach. Otherwise, we'd have to be a drunk. We'd have to be a prostitute. We'd have to, we can preach the word with confidence, but when it comes to family, having a wife and children certainly helps you traffic through those portions of Scripture with a lot more confidence. And so, yeah, that just the first child was such an exciting, I can remember just the thrill of thinking that we were going to have a child, and it was a firstborn son. I remember being in a restaurant and we had David in a car seat and he was small, I don't know, less than a year old, and there was a Jewish man and he had 7 daughters. I didn't see his wife there, but he had a little skull cap on, and I could tell they were Jewish. And he asked me what my baby's name was, and I said, he's my firstborn son, and his name is David. And he goes, oh, to have a firstborn son named David, that's such a joy, he said, I have 7 daughters. So, but then Jonathan came along 2 or 3 couple years later, and we didn't have any children again for almost 11 years. After Jonathan, we didn't think we could have any more children, and Katie was born by God's grace, and her middle name is Grace, Catherine Grace. I called her the rose in the midst of my 2 thorns. Probably wasn't very flattering to the boys, but in any case. So having children, raising a family, and now the joy of having grandchildren. So many people have said, that's what you have children for, is to live for your grandchildren. And I didn't understand that, but I certainly can understand that now. Providentially, I was a lot older when I got married, so I'm a lot older now. My children could be my grandchildren. My grandchildren could be my great-grandchildren. So I know that I will probably not see my grandchildren grow up into their later years, perhaps see them get married and that sort of thing. But that's all in God's providence. But so those are the 2 major events in my life, being married and having children, grandchildren.
So great. Good. It's really cool.
Zach?
Yeah, well, I would be amiss if I didn't say, first and foremost, to clarify, is that marrying Valerie has been I think one of the single greatest things God has used in my life to shape me, to mold me who I am today. We've been married going on 7 years. I'm looking forward to, Lord willing, the next 60, 70, 80 years. And then having kids is super formative too. Just the joy of children. But I'll share a couple of different stories in lieu of that. So I think something that's formative to me that stuck out in my mind as I was thinking about the question just a little bit ago was when Valerie had her first miscarriage and then second miscarriage. So we first got married. We were intending, we're going to wait. We're not going to have kids right away. And then we get pregnant with Anaya like a month after marriage. It was quite a surprise and shock to both of us. And then Anaya comes along, and I was so taken aback. I was not mature at all at that time. So there's definitely a lot of things that I missed out on because of my immaturity, with my daughter being a newborn. And there's just certain things that you understand more when you're a little bit more mature, have a little bit more of a head screwed on straight, that if you're a young, immature man, you're not going to understand those things. Just the sheer appreciation and joy of having a newborn, something as simple as that. But then after Anaya came along, we got pregnant again, and Valerie had a miscarriage, and that miscarriage was very hard, very painful for her. And it was just kind of shocking to us, just dealing with death in just a very personal way. So we actually, really cool, I think some of my family thought it was really weird, but my parents have an acreage out just west of Plattsmouth, and we actually took our baby and we buried them out and then planted a tree. I think it was a tree that either my dad had planted there for this reason or we had planted. Actually, I think we put the baby there with just a little cross, and then we planted a tree there. So actually, haven't been thinking about Eden, that's what we named them, whether it was a boy or a girl, Eden, what the garden was before death came, what life was. And that tree's growing. I actually haven't thought about it now that I think about it after going out to my parents several times, but I'm really glad that we did that. That was just processing through death in a very intimate way. And then we had Matthias, and then we ended up having another miscarriage. And that was also very difficult. We named that baby Salem. So those things, like having children is one thing, but then miscarriages sometimes for some people happen over and over and over again. I even thinking in relative to this, there was a time where me and Valerie, before we were married, I shared it. I don't know. I think I've shared this before in a sermon that I've preached, but happened to walk into friends of ours from an old church who just had a stillborn, and then the baby was laying out there on the platter, lifeless. So I think just death as it regards newborns or miscarriages, I think just formatively shaping me in regards to the reality that we live in. It's just not fun. The very opposite of that. And then being able to process through that biblically, and then also try to come alongside other people who, because miscarriages are a lot more common than people think. And there's a lot of shame attached to them too for women. But being able to deal with that biblically and applying the gospel rightly. So that was very formative. And I'm trying to think of another thing that was formative. And I think the thing I'll mention is when we were married, I was really struggling with joining the military and all this stuff. And it was moving from Nebraska, something I was very terrified of doing because I've always been in Nebraska, never left. Moved here when I was 6 months old, so I never knew anything different. But moving down to Kansas City, even though it's not that far away, it was actually very helpful for me and Valerie in our marriage, growing closer to one another, being theologically trained, and kind of more clearly solidifying this idea as like my calling to ministry through that time, and people pouring into me and me doing all. It was a very joyous time, but there was a lot of hard things that happened in that time, and sacrifices that were made both on mine and on Valerie's part too. So I would say those two events, moving away from family and everything we really know, basically, and living there for almost 3 years, and then the other thing being, death in the family, which death is always going to be formative. I mean, we can all think of friends or family to some extent that we've lost. That have shaped us in some form or manner. But yeah, those are two of the things, two moments. To say this again on the tail end, like meeting Valerie was the second best thing that ever happened to me in my life. So, and I didn't, yeah. So anyways, that was super, super formative for me as far as a moment, but yeah, I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop myself.
Yeah. It's good. Senior pastor?
Okay. So I've got a few ways I could go, some things firing in my mind, but one really formative and shaping moment for me, I guess it was over the period of a year, but it was becoming the senior pastor. You just mentioned that, becoming the senior pastor at Emmaus. I think that was a tumultuous process, only in that like there was some uncertainty there. So if you guys remember just taking the church back, Eric shared that he wanted to get back to Massachusetts, where he's from, and then recommended that the church go, and along with the elders, the route of me becoming the interim senior pastor for a year-long trial period to then become the senior pastor. And this was in 2018. And at that time, I just remember I was talking to my dad, and he was like, "Luke, you should not do this. I mean, Eric, you're about to step into Eric's shoes, and like, you sure you want to go down this right? Like, you'll never meet people's expectations, that kind of thing." And he looks back, and probably that wasn't the best counsel. There's some fear there, but that time, it was like, I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm going to trust the pastors above me. I'm going to trust the congregation, and I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to be praying. I'm going to be walking with the Lord closely, and I'm just going to, it just was this reinforcing that I can only do what I can do. I'm going to preach. I'm going to do the best I can, and let everything kind of just happen. And just trusting the Lord with my life. And when the vote went first to have me become the interim, that was great and wonderful. And then in 2019, when they made me senior pastor, I was just like, wow, this is amazing to have that affirmation from the church that I'm right where I should be. It was just very special, especially in light of how my time into ministry began. So a little history lesson. Back in 2012, I got asked to become a senior pastor at an assistant pastor at Emmaus. And there was some ecclesiological differences back then with where we're at now, but that was just a decision of the elders. There was 3 guys at the time, and they just announced it to the church. Hey, here's your new assistant pastor. And nobody really knew who I was. And so that was just like not the best way to do it. And so to have this long drawn out process of being, having to meet with a lot of people and get the encouragement from the elders and then the church, and to then see how it's played out over the last few years. That was an amazing moment for me. I'll never forget it. Then another one was, I'm just going to share a few stories regarding some sermons that have really just impacted me. I don't know if everybody's the same here, that they can distinctly remember certain sermons in their mind of just like blowing them up. But I've just got some really interesting ones. So let me just share 3 of them. One was back in like 2014. This is an interesting one, but so we were having some troubles in the church, and as a staff team, we had kind of talked about, Eric was going to do a sermon series that was going to kind of rebuke the church in a sense, like shift gears from we were in Hebrews to just go and be like, oh, we need Malachi right now for our church. And it's like, oh, maybe there was some youth there where we weren't thinking best. But anyway, the opening sermon was going to be like this heavy, exhortative, like, guys, we need to get our, church in gear here. And I was like, yeah, let's give it to them. And anyway, during that sermon, like, the Lord just completely convicted me. It's like the whole sermon, I was thinking it was for everybody else. And he just crushed me, floored me. And it was so powerful. And I was humbled. It was beautiful. Another one, fast forward, was in Hebrews, and I was just dealing with personal sin and feeling very low. And it was about Christ as our intercessory high priest who sympathizes with our weaknesses. And it was just so precious in every way that Christ keeps his people even in the midst of sin. And his love propels us forward to rid ourselves of sin. And I could probably go into another one, but I'm going to stop there because I don't think I can do it. But there you go.
Yeah, it was really rich. Thanks, brother. First, so I want to clarify before I get into these 2. By all means, salvation, marrying Lydia, having Thea, having Aaron, we're about to have Beatrix. Those would, by all means, come before this one. But just for the sake of adding some new stories at top of those, the first one actually comes from living with the Gorsets for a year. I was a resident, and by all means, my parents set a pretty good foundation growing up of just a family where the parents stay together. They love their kids. They go to church, pray before meals. But when I moved in with the Gorsets as a second-year resident, or maybe end of the first year, I was still a pretty good piece of work. Has some hard edges. And so with the foundation my parents had set, it was so helpful to see the model and the vision of the Gorsets and their way of doing family together. So I remember at that point I was reading a biography of Jonathan Edwards, and there was this missionary at one point in the book. It was recounted how he'd come to the Edwards house, and he remarked that there's never been better behaved children in the Edwards household. And he outlined how the Edwards would discipline their children. They'd get on a knee, they'd go eye to eye with the kids, they would administer the rod after explaining to the child why they're going to get spanked. And then they would, hug or have some form of reconciliation, and they'd go on their way. And just like, whoa, I just saw that like 100 times this past month with Luke and Heather, with the kids, and just seeing the fruit that God's given with their children, and just having that model before me, and then just talking with them, being able to hammer out ideas. I was so single at the time, and so very naive in a lot of my thoughts on, oh yeah, when I'm a father, when I'm a husband, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z with my household. And so having a year with them and seeing 24 hours a day for a year or so, that was very formative, very helpful. And I just kind of laugh at all the different ways that I imitate you guys. I think of the way that Heather kind of gets the kids' attention with the I do the same thing. Just the even the little things, not just the big things. So that was one of the thoughts that I had for just moments, events in my life that were very formative, living with you guys for a year. And the second one was actually missions in the Philippines. I did 2 months on an island called Siquijor, just south of Cebu. It's 15 by 12 mile island. And honestly, the mission trip was horrendous. So much conflict between our team. It was 3 of us Americans and 2 Filipino translators, and I was the only male of the Americans, so they made me the team leader, which is hilarious because I had never been on a mission trip before. I had no idea what I was doing. But I remember at one point, the one translator, he tells me, Josh, I really hate you. And I was thinking, buddy, do you know what that means? Like, 1 John, like, we got some issues there. And by all means, I wasn't doing very well as the team leader. I had my own issues, my own immaturities that were contributing to conflict. But just, one, it was great to have my mind put upside down on missions going into this trip. I viewed missions as kind of like a back burner, secondary thing that the church does. Kind of like these are your Lewis and Clark Christians who are explorers and adventurers. They become missionaries, and realizing, no, missions is the mission of the church. We're to reach Omaha, Nebraska as a whole, and to the ends of the earth. And so it's helpful to have a more biblical view of missions, but also it was a very healthy dose of what many missionaries who are on the field, whether it's the Stories or the Hansons, they know this very well, but just the high level of conflict that comes in missions and getting that firsthand experience of that. But then also just to see the actual need for missions. I think at that point I was 20 years old. And so in my mind, the only places that need missions work are like the Amazon rainforest, where you got, tribesmen wearing loincloths, throwing spears to hunt their, dinners that evening. Oh, that's the mission field. It was actually realizing like, no, there are cosmopolitan areas of 10, 15, 20 million people, but there's no churches there. And there are many areas of the world beyond rainforests, and tribesmen who do need the gospel, but there's many places that have not been reached for Christ. And so seeing the need for more missionaries, the scripture that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, and seeing how true that was in a way that I wasn't thinking of categorically. So that was another experience that was very profound for me. And so I love the Stories, love the Hansons. I'd love to see more missionaries be sent out. And it's definitely, as I aspire for the ministry, something that I want to focus on is, whether that's me going with our family or whether it's training up and sending out people, would be focusing on reaching the nations. So again, we're at just about 24 minutes, another shorter episode. Before we close, were there any closing thoughts for the church as they're just considering the moments and events that God's placed in their lives, how they should navigate those?
I would just say that it's always good to reflect on the goodness of God and how He's brought you through various things. And not to mention, there might be things that you're going through right now, obviously, that you feel like you're in the thick of it. But sometimes it's helpful to, as Luke was just doing, or like really any of us, we're just thinking about the things that God has taught us and the situations that He's brought us into. Providentially, that looks very different for all 4 of us, and how all of our lives have kind of looked differently. But to look back and see that God has a hand in all of it, and that there's purpose in it, and that it's helpful to know where you've been, and then using a biblical lens to see, okay, where am I going now? Like, it's just helpful. It can be very encouraging. And sometimes it also can be very hard because you struggle with things from the past and you mourn it. Mm-hmm. But that's also a really good thing too, because you're dealing with it emotionally in a biblical way. And then God will use that to shape for who He wants you to be in the future. And I think just overall healthy dose of reflection is needed in all of our lives. So
Great.
I could have said that a lot better, but that's basically what I think. This is just a helpful
That's
life.
fine.
Because we're also in the present and we have so many busyness going on, and like I would not be intentionally thinking about the past or this thing right now unless this was like the podcast that we're doing. And so it's just a good reminder to me to just reflect more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think providence is probably one of my favorite theological topics. And you mentioned looking back. John Flavel, in his book on the mystery of providence, says providence is like reading Hebrew. You have to read it backwards. You look back, you can't tell what God's going to do going forward. But when you look back, you can see so many of the stepping stones that he brought you through to make you who you are today. They're not always that clear, but it's an amazing thing to look back and just see all the places God led you, places that you never thought you would go, events in your life, people you met, books you read. It just go on and on. It truly is a mystery, but he's weaving together this beautiful tapestry, as that poem says. We look at it sometimes from the underside, have no idea what he's putting together, but it's beautiful from the upper side.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
Me neither.
Great. Well, it's been another episode of Walking and Talking. If you found this episode helpful, we simply ask that you would share it with a friend from church for further discussion. And we'll see you next time.